Peter Coy, and Peter is the economics editor of Bloomberg Business Week. He writes on a wide range of domestic and international issues. Matter of fact, he just got back from China, was it yesterday? Yesterday, so
Wow.
his timing is a little bit off about 12 hours. You know. He contributes to the magazine's opening remarks column, cover stories, news sections, and online coverage. And he appears frequently on radio and television. He had a cover story that's going to be the basis of his talk a couple of weeks ago on Bloomberg Business Week about water.
The dean said I wrote an interesting article about water, interesting to me anyway, just a few weeks ago, and it was the opening remarks column, and it was called Making Water More Liquid. The subhead is, when water is scarce, letting people trade it gets the precious resource to where it's needed most. And that's what I'm really going to talk about today. And I don't have a formal canned presentation because I never talked about this before. I've only written it. So it's kind of, I'm not just going to read the words on the page to you. I'm going to just talk about some of the ideas that I came across while doing the article. And I hope it'll stimulate some thoughts and questions on your part, and that we can have a real discussion here. And unlike Don, I'm not a water expert, but I do kind of bring the framework of thinking about markets and economics. So I try to apply that thinking to the issue of water, and I think it does lead to some insights. I'm not going to start by telling you that water is a precious resource. I guess I just did, but that's not what I'm going to dwell on, because I think you know it. And I think you have been learning through this sustainability program here at the college about how aquifers are running dry around the world, how fights over water resources are leading to wars. For example, the conflict in Syria now can be traced in part back to water shortages and the failure of the Syrian government to deal with them adequately. The Colorado River runs dry before it reaches the ocean, and the economy of California has been harmed by water shortages this past year. Farmers are drilling wells deeper and deeper, trying to suck up water from the aquifer before some other farmer gets them. So, I mean, I could go on with how water is a problem. What I try to do is say, well, what's the solution? Now, Don, trained as an engineer, can talk much better than I can about sort of the engineering solutions to water. Well, we go run down the list from desalination to conservation to reuse and on and on. What I was trying to do in my article is say, well, what are the market mechanisms that you want to have in place that would encourage some of these engineering solutions to happen? Because if people don't have an incentive to do something, for example, if party A has a water surplus and party B has a water shortage, if there's no mechanism by which A gives water to B, then A will just overuse and B will be caught short. And that's where markets come in, and that's what I meant by making water more liquid. Obviously, I'm not talking about the physical sense of the word. I'm talking about liquidity in the market sense. And if you guys study business, you've been learning about liquidity. The stock market, liquidity means the ability to buy and sell without moving the market against you. For example, shares of IBM are much more liquid than your house. If you needed to sell your house in the next 30 seconds, well, you won't be able to find a buyer who is going to buy it from you just because they don't have the time to get the cash together. You might end up selling your house for $30 or whatever, how much money that guy has in his wallet at the moment, versus a share of IBM or name your company, Microsoft, Facebook, where there's a constant market. Buyers and sellers are constantly meeting, and the price is known, and the sales occur. Well, wouldn't it be nice if that could happen with water? And interestingly enough, there is such a market in Australia. Australia is the driest of the populated continents. I'm leaving out Antarctica. And so they've had to be ahead of the rest of the world in developing markets for water. In Australia, in the Murray-Darling Basin, which is the watershed that serves the biggest cities on the eastern coast of Australia, they had a terrible drought, and they call it the Millennium Drought. And yet, people did not go lacking for water. Even farmers managed to stay in business. And it's because the least productive uses went away, and the water was diverted to the most productive uses. Now, how did that happen? It's because the people had water rights, and they were able to sell those water rights. And it was an arm's length, mutually beneficial relationship, which is how markets work. Versus a situation where, take the eastern seaboard of the United States, where we all live now, we don't have water markets here. They've never developed, partly because they've never been needed. And there's, Don's going to probably disagree with this, but water's relatively plentiful here, certainly more plentiful here than, say, in California, Nevada, the western states of the United States, or Australia. Most of my article actually concerns California, which has been going through a severe multi-year drought. California is somewhere between where Australia is and where we are here on the East Coast, in that there is a water market. It doesn't operate very efficiently. Water does not get easily from where it's in surplus to where it's in deficit. And a lot of my article is tracing what California needs to do, and implicitly where other states and countries, what they need to do to make the markets work better. So, I'll just give you an example. In California, surface water is regulated, is allocated, but groundwater is not. So what's the difference? When you can't get enough surface water, you start going into the groundwater. And that's fine as long as everybody just drills a little well on their property and takes what's theirs. But the aquifer from which they're drawing is shared. There's no underground barriers that separate one plot of land from another. So when you put a straw down into that aquifer and start sucking out of it, you're pulling water from your neighbors. So then they say, oh, I'll just drill a slightly deeper well and I'll pull water out of there. So then they're pulling away from you, and down we go. This is known as the tragedy of the commons, and that's something you probably studied in business. Tragedy of the commons is what happens when there's a resource that is shared that in which no person has a property right. And so there's a temptation to take. It happens if you sheep overgrazing a meadow that is shared, or when fishermen overfish cod in the North Atlantic. It's happening with water in California right now. The state of California last year, just about 1 year ago, October 2014, finally passed a law regulating groundwater, and there were the predictable complaints of the farmers. How dare you? That's my water. How dare you tell me that I can't get water out of my own well? And yet other farmers said, well, no, of course this has to happen. Because it's really not your water, it's a common resource. Some people tend to think that there's something kind of unethical about having water rights. Like, this is God's gift to all of us, right? Water is something that the planet, of the planet as a whole. But you see what happens when we have water. Let me put it this way. I guess I'm kind of saying the same thing again. But if water is a common resource, which it clearly is, and yet people use it in excess, then others go without. So the system of water rights, it doesn't say you own the water. All it says is that we have agreed among ourselves that you can have such and such usage. If it turns out you don't need all of that, then you can sell your excess. You're bringing market forces to work in the service of the environment. So I'd like to get a discussion going on this. So rather than keep talking, because I think I've introduced a principle now, I think maybe maybe I could just open it up a little bit and ask you guys kind of what you think about this and what you've been learning about water and markets. So do I understand that most of you are students in the business school here, is that right? So have you been taking courses where you get into the topic of the tragedy of the commons comes up as a concept in like your introductory econ course?
I teach that, so you all should shake your head yes.
Okay, they're all shaking their heads yes, I can see that. I mean, does it strike you as something wrong that water, which comes out of the sky, there should be a claim on it, like this is my water, not yours, and that there should be sort of property rights over water? Does that seem like kind of an odd idea? Trying to get a discussion going here. Yeah, back there.
Yeah, I think it's a little odd to try to put a limit on water, especially underground. Like, I don't think how are they doing it exactly as the law in California? Like, what do you propose to limit the water intake?
Okay, the surface water is already regulated. The new law is the one regarding the underground water, which is in the aquifers.
Yes.
So it's kind of, the law says, first of all, we're going to put a meter on your water aquifer. Same way you have a meter on your house, so United Water can keep track of how much water you're using. And kind of people agree. That seems sensible, right? You don't want to have your next door neighbor using more water than you without paying more for it. Well, the concept is similar for water coming out of a well. How much, you'd be monitored on how much water you're pulling out of the ground. So the person who's pulling a lot of water should somehow pay more than the person who's not using much at all. And then you make a transition. Once you know how much water is coming out, then you can see if it's being overused and if the water table is falling and the aquifer is running dry, then you can decide, okay, we're going to put a price on this. The same way you put a price on surface water. Seems reasonable, right? If you don't do that, then that's the tragedy of the commons.
Quick question, are they giving the water out to, like, if I have a larger piece of land, would I get more water than my neighbor, or would I get the same amount?
That's actually a really good question. I actually don't know how the law works in California on that.
Because how it sounds, they're not taking consideration of how much water the farmers need. Because
Right.
if you are strictly a crop farmer, you don't need as much as someone who raises animals.
Right.
Because the animals will need more water than the crop.
Okay, so you're getting into exactly the right questions. I'm enjoying this because let's take that example. Cattle raising uses a whole lot of water because you got to feed, you got to grow the alfalfa or whatever the cattle are going to eat, and you slaughter the cattle, meat. There's something called the sort of gallons of water equivalent of different crops, and if you eat a hamburger you're in effect consuming 250 gallons of water with each hamburger you eat, because that's how much water it takes to raise the grain and that feeds the cattle that turns into the meat. Versus if you're just eating vegetables, then it's a much smaller ratio, maybe 10 gallons of water for every serving of vegetables. So right now, the impact on the environment that you have as an eater of a hamburger isn't reflected in the price of the hamburger because the water isn't priced. But if the water is accurately priced, then people say, you know what, we're going to have to charge more for our beef because it's costing more water to produce that beef. The price of beef will go up relative to the price of vegetables. It could cause some people to say, you know what, I think I'm going to have a serving of rice and beans today instead of meat. And that's a market forces working the way they should work to minimize the use of water, to conserve on water. So what you're talking about is exactly what I'm trying to get at with this whole idea of making water more liquid and harnessing market forces. It's not saying, no, you can't have a hamburger. If you really want the hamburger, fine. Pay for it, but pay the full cost, including all the impact on the environment that you have by eating that hamburger. So I hope that answers your question. I didn't answer the part about whether you're entitled to more water because of the acreage you have, but I think it's just based on how much water you use. If you have a big house in Rockland County or Bergen County or something, you don't get access to more water because of the size of your house. You pay for however much you use. I think it pretty much is going to work that way in California too. So that was good. Back there in the last row?
If you propose that you pay for the environmental impact of water, where are you going to draw the line? So you say, you're charging for water, but what about the other, environmental impacts that creating a hamburger might have? Like, it's kind of hard to just say, we're going to up the price because of how much water you use when, I don't know, what other environmental impacts go into creating that hamburger, you know what I mean? Like,
Well, give me an example of another environmental impact.
I don't know. Yeah, there you go.
What?
Like carbon.
Oh, well, carbon should also be priced, by the way.
Okay.
Basically, I'm also very much in favor of carbon markets, cap and trade or something like that. Basically, we're talking about, this is the introductory econ, they talk about externalities. There are positive externalities and negative externalities. Positive externalities when you plant flower, everybody else in the neighborhood gets to see them too. So you've created something that is external to you and it's a benefit. Well, a negative externality is when you, for example, cause pollution. It bothers you because the smoke's getting in your lungs, but it's bothering everybody else as well. So using too much water is a negative externality in the sense that you get the benefits of the water, and yet everybody else pays the cost of not having enough water. So yes, every resource should be priced, and the water is a resource, so is the air. So anybody who puts more carbon into the air should be paying the price of their carbon emissions. They're very similar issues, actually. It's again harnessing market forces. So let's stick with the carbon thing, for example, because it's a nice analogy. If you have two factories that are producing the same amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere every year, and one, they could be each allocated the same number of permits to produce carbon dioxide, and then each year their number of permits goes down because you're trying to reduce total output. The factory, they have two different technologies. One can easily cut and the other cannot easily cut. The one that has trouble cutting is going to have to slash jobs in order to meet the new standard. So it says, look, I have an idea. Let me buy some permits from the company that has an easier time reducing. So the company that has the easier time reducing actually cuts more than it's required to, so that the one that has a harder time cuts less. The result of that is that you get the desired reduction in carbon output, and yet the jobs are saved because the company that has a hard time cutting keeps producing a little more and keeps production and keeps jobs. That's a carbon equivalent of what we're talking about here for water, getting the most efficient outcome by using price. And I should probably stop now because I realize I've kind of gone over my time, and I want to leave time for Don. And then after both of us have spoken, there should be time for more discussion between the two of us and the audience. So thank you very much for your attention.